Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. For today's video, I have got part 2 of my recent reads video. So in part 1, I talked about all of the physical books that I've read over the last couple months that I hadn't been posting on YouTube, just to kind of catch you guys up on what books I've been reading. And here in part 2, I'm going to be talking about all of the audiobooks that I've listened to over the last couple of months. I will just give you a heads up and tell you that every single one of them is going to be a nonfiction book, because that's pretty much the only genre that I listen to in audiobook form. So this is all of the nonfiction audiobooks that I've listened to over the last couple months. So without further ado, let's just jump right in. I am going to be looking down at my phone a lot just because it's been a good 2 to 3 months since I have read these books, so I want to remember all of the titles and authors properly, and I'll just post pictures of the covers up on the screen. So starting off, we have Madly Deeply, The Diaries of Alan Rickman, and this is exactly how it sounds. It is The Diaries of Alan Rickman, which were published after his passing. Now, there is actually a part at the beginning of this book where it specifically says that we don't know that Alan Rickman ever meant for his diaries to be published, and I feel like that is something that you could very much tell from actually reading this book, is that Alan Rickman did not intend for other people to read his diaries, and I have to say that made me feel a little bit icky reading this book. Like, it felt like an invasion of privacy personally for me, and it might be an unpopular opinion, but I just didn't enjoy my time reading this book. On top of the fact that it just felt like a weird invasion of privacy, it also just wasn't the most interesting thing to read about. While I find Alan Rickman to be a very interesting person, he definitely just wrote his diary in a way, he almost used it more as like a planner, so it just was very bluntly written, and it just wasn't the most interesting thing, probably because he didn't intend for it to be published and consumed by other people in the future. He also spoke very bluntly about a lot of people, which, while Alan Rickman does strike me as the kind of person that would say a lot of these things to your face, I also just don't know that he would have. Like, it just kind of felt weird to be reading it, and I kind of regret reading it, to be frank with you. Next up, we have When a Killer Calls, A Haunting Story of Murder, Criminal Profiling, and Justice in a Small Town by John E. Douglas. This is actually my second John E. Douglas book that I've read. He is a true crime author, but also a professional criminal profiler, which just takes his true crime books to another level, because the psychological facts that he adds to what is happening is extremely interesting. So in this particular book, we're following this case that happened in a very small town, and where the title comes from is actually because this killer would call the victims' families on the phone. It was very disturbing, but it makes for a really interesting case, and I just love how his books are written. They're very entertaining, but also extremely kind of educational at the same time, so I would totally recommend any of the books that he has put out. I think he has 3 out so far, so there's still one that I haven't read yet that I want to pick up soon. After listening to that, I was definitely on a bit of a true crime kick, so the next one that I picked up was I'll Be Gone in the Dark, One Woman's Obsessive Search for the Golden State Killer by Michelle McNamara. So this is another true crime book that specifically is about the Golden State Killer. Now, something that definitely has to be mentioned before I talk about this book is that unfortunately the author actually passed away before this book was able to be published, and I do believe that this book was also published before they caught the Golden State Killer. So unfortunately we'll never know for sure if how this book was published was how the author intended for it to be published. So what I mean by that is that this book was not always told in chronological order, and that made it very muddled to read about. For me personally, I was really looking forward to this book because I've heard so many good things about it, but I just did not like how this book was formatted. It just was muddled, it made it hard to follow, and I just feel like there are so many other even YouTube videos that just kind of sum up the story of it a lot better than how this book did. And there were a good number of chapters in this book that opened with it saying this was pieced together by the author's notes. So she didn't even finish, writing some of these chapters. So a good portion of this book was just pieced together by the editors, and I believe her husband, Patton Oswalt, worked a lot on this book. He actually wrote the afterword for it, and there's an introduction for this book by Gillian Flynn. I feel like this book had so much potential to be amazing just because of how passionate the author was on this subject, and it's really unfortunate that she passed away before she was able to finish it. But for me personally, I really wanted to love this book, but I just didn't feel like it was the most digestible way for it to be formatted, and that really ruined it for me, unfortunately. Now, to take a little short break from the very heavy subjects of true crime, our next book is very lighthearted and wholesome, and that is How Y'all Doing? Misadventures in Mischief from a Life Well Lived by Leslie Jordan. This is his memoir slash autobiography. It's very short. I think the audiobook was only like 5 or 6 hours long, and he does narrate it, which was just lovely to listen to. While this is like very lighthearted, there is a little bit of a heaviness to it because unfortunately Leslie Jordan has also passed away, unfortunately, since writing this book, but it was still so lovely just to hear him speak about things. He had like such a positive view of life, and this book was just so lighthearted and heartwarming and funny, and it was just a nice little break from the very heavy topics of true crime that I normally listen to when it comes to my audiobooks. So I really enjoyed this. I would definitely recommend it if you also enjoy Leslie Jordan and just want to hear him read this book to you. It's a very good time. I would definitely recommend the audiobook if you're going to pick this up. Jumping back into subjects of death though, the next book that I have is From Here to Eternity, Traveling the World to Find the Good Death by Caitlin Doughty. This is actually a reread for me. The first time that I read it, I read the physical copy, and I'd been wanting to reread it anyway because I tend to forget things pretty quickly when it comes to books, and this one was so interesting, so I'd wanted to reread it anyway, and then I came across the audiobook that was also read by the author, and I just love Caitlin Doughty's voice. If you don't know, she's actually a YouTuber as well, and she does these really interesting videos. You should definitely check it out. Her channel is, I think it's just Caitlin Doughty now, but it might still be Ask a Mortician because she's also a mortician. Either way, you should look up her channel, but she has like such a lovely like ASMR kind of voice. So when I saw that there was an audiobook version of this that was read by her, I was like, I totally have to check this out since I was planning on rereading it anyway. So this particular book is actually about her time traveling to different places in the US, but also to other countries, and seeing how their mourning and death rituals are in other places. And it is extremely interesting because there are places out there where their death and mourning rituals are just vastly different from what you see in the US, and it's just things that I'd never heard of before until I picked this book up. And that was another reason that I wanted to just reread it, was because I feel like I was starting to forget, and like this is such interesting topics to me. I just absolutely am fascinated by it. So if that seems like something that would be interesting to you too, I would definitely recommend picking this book up. One trigger warning for this book though, besides the obvious of like, you know, it being a much heavier subject, is that in some other countries there are like animal rituals that go along with their death or mourning rituals. It is described in this book as well, and I remember the first time that I read it, it kind of caught me off guard, so that's just a trigger warning for anybody that might be interested in picking this book up. I wouldn't let it hinder you too much though. It's literally like one page that you can like very quickly skip over. Like once you realize that that's what's going to happen, it's really easy to just jump over that part and read the rest of the book. But I know personally for me, I feel like that's not a trigger warning I hear about often, is like, you know, animal death or sacrificing or anything like that, so just be aware that that is something that happens in this book. We've got 2 more books to talk about. Next up is Beyond the Wand, The Magic and Mayhem of Growing Up a Wizard by Tom Felton, who, if you don't know, is the actor who played Draco Malfoy on the Harry Potter movies. So I'll be honest, I'm not like the biggest Harry Potter fan. Like, I'll watch the movies if they're like on TV, and my mom likes to watch them a lot more than I do, but I still, you know, I enjoy the Harry Potter movies. I've also never been like a Draco Malfoy girly, so I don't even really know why I picked this book up. I think I just like needed an audiobook, and every other book was on like a wait list, and I was like, this is vaguely interesting to me, so I ended up picking it up, and I really enjoyed this book. I'm not really sure why. Once again, it was read by the author. Tom Felton has like a lovely British accent, which, you know, read me like to sleep a lot of the times, so that was very enjoyable. But I don't know, I think it's just he was actually a very good writer. I don't know if he had like a ghostwriter or whatever, you know, like most celebrities do, whatever, but I just thought that he wrote extremely well, and it was just very interesting to read about. And, you know, he was one of those people that very much grew up, like when he first joined the Harry Potter cast, like he was very, very young, and so he very much grew up in this very weird way, and it was just very interesting to read about. But besides that, I really don't know why I enjoyed the book so much, because I really am not much of a Harry Potter person, and I've never really been interested in Tom Felton, but his voice is lovely. So anyways, moving on. That was the most unhelpful book review I've ever done in my life. Also, you probably noticed that I am not saying star ratings for any of these books, and that is because I don't really like to rate nonfiction books, especially when it comes to like memoirs or autobiographies, because it feels extremely weird to rate a person's life. So that is why I'm not mentioning any star ratings or anything like that, is because it just kind of feels weird when I talk about nonfiction books. The final book that we have to talk about is not one that I've ever heard anybody else talk about, and it's on a subject that I have never talked about before. Might be controversial, we will see, but that is Becoming Free Indeed, My Story of Disentangling Faith from Fear by Ginger Duggar Volo? I'm not 100% sure how to say her last name. I'm so sorry. I'm sure a lot of you probably recognize her based off of her first and middle name though, which is Ginger Duggar. She is one of the Duggar daughters. Now, I was very interested in picking this book up because I feel like on some level all of us are a little bit fascinated by like the Duggars and how they live their lives and just wanting to learn like why somebody would do those kinds of things. So when I saw that this book was coming out, I was very interested in picking it up because I had heard over the years that some of the like Duggar daughters specifically were kind of changing their ways and like separating how they live their life from how their parents are. So I should start off by saying that I like remember as a kid watching some of the like TV shows with them, but outside of that I've never really kept up with them besides like the controversies and stuff like that that you just like can't avoid hearing about because they end up all over social media. But I was really interested to see what she had to say in this book. So this book specifically is about basically something that I didn't know until reading this book was I guess the Duggar family followed this specific religious leader. It was this man, I don't remember what his name was, but he had like a cult following of people, and he taught this very specific religious Christian belief that taught a lot of the things that you would then see the Duggars implement in their lives, like the way that they were dressing or their courting, dating, whatever things that they would do. All of that stuff seemed to come from this particular man's teaching. And in this book, we actually see Ginger take those teachings and compare them to what the Bible actually says on these subjects and how those are two different things, and that he had a very warped teaching of Christianity that was not actually biblically based. And it was extremely interesting seeing Ginger break these things down and kind of come to these realizations that that is not what Christianity actually is and what the Bible actually teaches. So that is what this book is about. If you're going into this book thinking that it's going to be like about her whole life or like the controversies that their family went through or anything like that, that is not what this book is about. It is very much just based around these topics. It's very much like a religious kind of book, and it's extremely interesting to read about. And she talks a lot in this book about a lot of people that grow up with these kinds of religious traumas and then end up leaving the faith entirely. And so I think this was a really interesting take, getting to see somebody who grew up with religious trauma but not leaving the faith completely, but actually finding like the truth of what the Bible teaches versus what some man claims to know. If you have any interest in that kind of religious stuff at all, I would definitely recommend picking it up. But if you want to pick it up thinking that this is going to be like about the controversies or anything like that, that is not what this book is at all. It's very much a religious kind of book, and it was very interesting personally for me to read about. So those are all of the nonfiction audiobooks that I've read over the last couple months. Leave me a comment down below. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. I'd love to discuss them with you in the comments. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!